And of course, all the treasures in the house of the Lord were carried away. So the world was in turmoil. Judah was in turmoil. Judah was in sin. And Jeremiah seemingly was alone in all of this. But then there's an interesting, as we get another view of Jeremiah from the book of Lamentations, there's an interesting, he in all of his depression, in all of his turmoil, in all of his angst because of all the persecution that he was suffering, he presents an interesting response here. In the 3rd chapter of Lamentations, and we'll begin with the 18th verse. And I said, my strength, Jeremiah saying, my strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall. That's not good. The wormwood, gall, that's a poison. He just was in a bad situation. Verse 20, my soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. Now, in all of this turmoil, his mental anguish and so forth, he says, it is the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassion fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. It's just as if Jeremiah was pondering all of this depression and all of this assault and all this, and then he just his mind just focuses on the goodness of the Lord. Now we have a song about that, don't we? We have a song taken from this portion of Scripture. It's often in a camp situation. It's often that song is often used. So, in all of the turmoil, here Jeremiah springs forth with this notion, and it was kind of as if he was preaching to himself there. You ever preach to yourself? Preach? I mean, you ever talk to yourself? You just and you just start, things are bad, and then you just start thinking, well, this isn't the end of things. This isn't all there is. There's God and his goodness. Well, now let's go back to the 17th chapter here, where Jeremiah is confronted with and confronts the situation, the reality that, I guess, the present, his present. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, and with the point of a diamond it is graven upon the table of their hearts and upon the horns of your altars. Now, I wonder why he used that expression with a pen of iron and the point of a diamond. Why he said the sin is written in their hearts with a pen of a, yeah. I mean, it's totally ingrained in them, totally ingrained in the social order, the individuals within the social order, and of course there were those that I'm sure weren't of the same mind, but whilst their children remembered let's go back to the horns of the altar, of your altars. Now, altars. These Jews had, obviously the altar that was in the temple, but they had other altars to the heavens, to the stars, to the universe, to Baal, to Astaroth, to you name it. They had altars to the gods, the so-called gods. Whilst their children remember their altars and their groves by the green trees upon the high hills. These altars they had spread out all over the place, all over Jerusalem, and then outside the environs of Jerusalem they had altars on the high hills and wherever there might be some trees and that sort of thing. They just had them. They just had these altars all over the place. Then in verse 3, "O my mountain in the field, I will give thy substance and all thy treasures to the spoil, and I have places for sin throughout all thy borders." Well, I wonder what he's talking about there. Oh, my mountain. Oh, my mountain. What's he referencing there? Oh, my mountain. Pardon me? His own people. And the temple was kind of the, representation. The people were represented by the temple, the hill of Zion, the mountain of Jerusalem, talking about his people, and his people were focused on that real estate there in Zion, in Jerusalem. "O my mountain in the field, I will give thy substance and all thy treasures to the spoil, and thy high places for sin throughout all thy borders." When Nebuchadnezzar came into Jerusalem, there were several assaults on Jerusalem over time, but kind of the final assault, he carries away the spoils, the temple fixtures, all of the wealth and the fixtures in the temple. All of that was carried away into Babylon. He says that's going to happen. It did happen. Now, some of that spoil was returned 70 years later when there was a remnant that came back. I don't know, what portion of it, but some of it. "And thou," in verse 4, "and thou even thyself shall discontinue from thine heritage that I give thee. And I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever." Now that term "forever" doesn't mean an eternity on and on, but it's a long period of time. Now, just thinking about this heritage, what is our heritage in terms of our civil government? What's our heritage? Um, you know, most of us are rather patriotic, aren't we? I mean, at least in my generation, we learned to be patriotic in the system, in our school system. We learned to be patriotic. We have reverenced some pride in our flag, don't we? Still. Now let's suppose all that heritage, suppose we were carried away into, well, let's just pick to Iraq, and we were forced to try to be patriotic to the Iraqi flag or the Iranian flag or the Iranian social order or the Iranian gods, and the Iranian God is not the God of heaven, of course. I mean, that'd be tough, wouldn't it?
I get your point, Bill, but that would never happen.
How's that?
I said I get your point. I was not even saying it, but that would never happen. We would go insane and hear fire God.
Okay.
But I get your point.
Yeah. But we might, they didn't have any choice. No doubt they were forced to pay homage to the gods of the Babylonians. Isn't that something? I mean, wouldn't that be to give up our heritage for some other, whatever. When some of the people returning from battle in the World War II, there was kind of something where when they'd get back home, what would they do? Some of those soldiers get back home. Kiss the ground. It was they had experienced a lot, but and you've heard people that have taken trips, elsewhere, and they get back. They've maybe enjoyed the culture, but it's just it was their heritage at home here. See.
Real quick, to your point, and since you brought up, POWs, well, not you bring POWs, but remember you talk about how we would be forced to, bow down to another flag or whatever, but then, when you bring up the military thing, you think of how they used to make, like, what was it in Vietnam? They would make the prisoners of war sign these documents saying that they were traitors, and so that's
Yeah.
kind of, what that brought to mind for me.
Yeah. You sign a confession of some kind.
Or die.
Yeah. And they'd use it for propaganda. So we get the sense of how much trauma these people would be facing. Thus, and particularly if you were Jewish, the Jews were God's chosen people. The Jews were special. But no more when they get to the Babylonian environment. Thus saith the Lord, cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and his heart departeth from the Lord. Well, there are a lot of lessons there for the American people today. There were a lot of, in going back to Jerusalem, the leaders of Jerusalem often depended on whom? Sometimes Egypt. Sometimes Assyria. And at some periods on Babylon. And on other countries. They were chastised. The prophets chastised them for making alliances, military and civil agreements with Egypt and with Assyria and Babylon and so on. And so the point is there, he's reminding you, you have trusted on these people for your protection, and it didn't work. Now, the Gospel Advocate has run a series in that last 2 or 3 months, I don't remember which month, on humanism. Now, what's humanism? We ought to be aware of what humanism is. What's humanism? What's the basic the basic premise of humanism?
What's it like being kind to other people, that sort of thing?
No.
That man is the ultimate, and that he can solve all his own problems.
That the epitome of the universe is man. The big man on campus. That the human being is the highest form in all the universe. And so, that's kind of this was kind of a humanistic philosophy that we're going to depend on. And of course, Jeremiah says it's not in man to direct his own steps. The humanists would say, well, man is capable of directing his own steps or her own steps. That the man, but now if you took that philosophy, where would you find your moral code? If you took that philosophy, where would you find what culture would you point to as being the moral code? The one you're in. Would we like the moral code of let's say China? Would we like the moral code of the culture of Iran? I mean, is that the standard? Would the moral code of, let's say, Hungary, the country of Italy, you go around the world of the over 100 nations, which moral code would be the one to follow?
Be the Burger King mentality. Have it your way.
Okay. So, I mean, which one are you going to choose? If you're a humanist, which one are you going to choose?
Whichever one suits you, I suppose.
Yeah.
Whichever one you like best.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is that God has said to the Jews, and he says to all mankind, the moral code is coming from God. It's not coming from the Spirit. So that's what he's saying there in verse 5. And more specifically, he says, you Jews you've been depending on Egypt. You've been depending on all these nations around about. That's the arm of flesh instead of the arm of God. For he shall be like the heath, the King James Version says, or the shrub in the desert. That's one that trusts in humanism, in mankind. Now, this shrub, I don't know anything about those shrubs except it's a heath or a shrub in the desert. Well, a shrub in the desert, an old shrub would be snarled and it. Huh? Tumbleweed might come to mind, but it's just all snarly, and it's just of what value is it? Well, It's of no value. But he, for he shall be like, that is the one that depends on the arm of the flesh, shall be like the heath or the shrub in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness. How much farming takes place among the shrubs? How much good fruit is harvested from the shrubs in the desert places, in the parched places, in the salt land, and not inhabited, except for the sidewinders and the snakes and the other varmints that aren't particularly conducive to man's needs. Now, blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is. For he shall be as a tree planted by the rivers, or by the waters, that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh. But her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought. And no problem in the year of drought. Neither shall cease from the yielding fruit. So, the yielding fruit shall continue. Well, those words there remind us of what other scripture? What psalm does that remind us of? Pardon me? What about the first psalm? Blessed is the man, this psalm starts out, blessed is the man, and then those that are godly, what are they? Someone turn to Psalm 1, and let's just read a few. They shall be like, the righteous shall be like trees planted by the rivers of water. Somebody have that Psalm 1.
Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he does shall prosper.
Okay. That's the same idea here. Now, if you saw a stream of water, and you were from a distance or from an airplane, and you saw a stream of water going through a desolate area, what would you find along the banks of that stream of water going through the desolate area? Obviously trees, right? Maybe I've seen such a scene as that. Whether it be, some of you have probably seen the Jordan River, and as it winds through the country, through the desolate areas, in some cases, trees or vegetation along the way. Blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, verse 7, whose hope the Lord is. For he shall be as a tree planted by the river, by the waters, and so forth. Now, verse 9, the heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart, and I try the reins. That is, the very emotions. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doing. Now, the Lord, search the heart and try the reins, even every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doing. Now, what's Jeremiah saying? What's the situation there? I mean, is that a sobering kind of thing? that God gets into the mind of man, into the emotions of man, and in the thinking of man? Now, you ever have any bad thoughts? Ever have any notions you'd like to knock somebody's head off?
You know, and I try to, well, you know I drive for a living in a semi.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, I tell people I bring in their goods and services and all I get all day long is cut off and flipped off. So you can imagine that they're way less than they used to be. But I do have those immediate human, you know what, thoughts.
Yeah.
And I have to just stop because I know he sees that and hears that. And it's not just because I know I know I'm not supposed to do that. So I just immediately,
Yeah.
sometimes not immediately, but I just repent and ask
Yeah.
for forgiveness and strength to not do it again.
Yeah,
And it usually helps.
And God understands that idea of repentance, right?
Yeah, because if I just keep doing it, which I kind of do, you know, because sometimes I'm like, I'll actually say to him, you know, I know you're sick of me, and here I go again, or something to that effect. But I do genuinely feel remorse when it happens. And I try to help me catch it before it happens. And sometimes I do, but it's hard, Bill, when somebody just jumps in front of you, you slam on the brakes, and all your stuff just goes, sorry, I'm not a flashback. Just flying.
I get it.
Or a chest full of ice, and they just keep right on going. I'm not out here, just so you all know, to get in your way. I'm working. I'm out here working.
I get it.
Sorry.
That's good. I got it. Nikki is just.
19 years.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. Let me just interpret what you say. She says what's in our minds. You know. Sometimes.
I'm like Andy Rooney. I say whatever, for those of you who remember him, at the end of 60 Minutes, he says what everybody else is thinking but won't say.
Okay. Well, let's just move on here. It's the heart is deceitful, and the Lord searches the heart. And God says, I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings. Verse 11 says, as a partridge sitteth on eggs, and hatcheth them not, so he that getteth riches, and not by right, shall leave them in the midst of his days, and at his end shall be a fool. Now, I don't know anything about these partridges. I don't know anything about them. And people that have, scholars that have looked at this verse have said, well, a partridge will abscond, pull together eggs that it hasn't laid. The others think, well, she sits on a nest of another bird and hatches them, and there's just confusion there. I have no clue as to what this partridge thing is, but what I do know is that what he's saying here is that a person that gains riches by hook or by crook, without those riches belonging to him or her, those things are going to ultimately disappear. And in the spiritual realm, the person is going to be at the bottom of the pit, so to speak. Well, we just know that in that Jewish society, there were those that, and throughout the whole history of the Jewish nation, even to the time of Christ, to the time of the Pharisees, when they took advantage of widows and orphans, took advantage of their aged parents. You know, they were gathering up goods that didn't belong to them, and God is greatly condemning that attitude and that practice. Verse 12, a glorious high throne from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. O Lord, the hope of Israel, and all that forsake thee shall be ashamed. And they that depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of the living waters. We had some sermons lately, or at least one sermon, about the name being written in the book of life. Now, if your name is written in the earth, how long does that last? First rain. That's what he's saying. That's not a good thing. Even, I went to a graveyard where my parents are buried, and looked at some of the old graves there that were there in the late 1700s or early 1800s, and some of those tombstones, and you can't read the names. You can't read anything about that because it's been weathered. So even if their name is written in stone, in a matter of time, it's going to vanish. And so the contrast here, we get the contrast here between having one's name written in heaven and on earth, whether it be in the dust or even a stone, that over time it's going to wear off. Then let's read that for 13. O Lord, the hope of Israel, and all that forsake thee shall be ashamed. And they that depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for thou art my praise. Behold, they say unto me, where is the Lord, the word of the Lord? Let it come now. What was Jeremiah preaching to these people? He was preaching that, the Babylonians are coming. We're going to be punished. And what was the reaction of these people? Well, it's not happened. And it's not going to happen. So why? What are you, old man? Or crazy preacher? What are you talking about? The word of the Lord, it's not coming to pass. It's not going to happen. And that's where they were obviously totally wrong.